Costello, in particular, attacks in a Swift-like satire his own Spanish culture for its insularity and obsession with purity, which includes denying the Arabic influence and the rich Andalusian cultural legacy. His famous trilogy, Marks of Identity, Count Julian, and Juan the Landless, published between 1970 and 1975, shocked the Spanish conscience with its celebration of 700 years of Arab Spain and the Hybrid culture. It celebrates the virtues of Arabic language and poetry against the Spanish apostasy practiced in inquisitions, and later resulted in the expulsions of Arabs and Spain's intellectual stagnation and insulation, as if it, quote, had entered a long holiday from history, as he once said. Sympathetically identified with his childhood experience when his mother was killed in General Franco's raid in Barcelona during the Civil War between 1936 and 1939, Costello grew up to resent, in his 50 published books of fiction, autobiography, essays, journalism, and travel literature, all forms of oppression. His books were confiscated and banned. He became more famous at police stations than he was at bookstores, as he said. He left Spain to France, where he made literary and intellectual friendships with Samuel Beckett, Ernest Hemingway, Guy Deport, and Jane Jennett, his mentor and best friend. After his wife, Monique Lang, a well-known literary figure, left him, he settled in Marrakesh. He lived in a house overlooking the historical Jami' al-Fina, where he learned his colloquial Arabic. He successfully headed a UNESCO drive to designate the mosque as the world's first oral heritage site. The Peruvian novelist Mario Vargas Llosa, the Nobel Prize winner in literature of 2010, says of Costello books, they are unsettling, apocalyptic, a strange mixture of pitiless autobiography, the debunking of mythologies and conformist fetishes, passionate exploration of the periphery of the West, in particular the Arab world, and audacious linguistic experiment. For his critic and translator, Peter Bush, there is no other Spanish writer matching Costello's intellectual reach, constant invention of language, and unusual absorption of other cultures, or stands on a par with best of that Latin American writers like Marquez and Julio Cortázar. Although he writes novels in an avant-garde, provocative, modernist style, there is always political urgency behind him. His keen sense of history comes from his own life. Kazim Jihad, the Iraqi poet and critic translator, played a significant role in introducing Costello to the Arabic language and through translating Palestinian diaries, Journeys to the East, and in Spanish Orientalism, and selected chapters from novels published in Arabic under the title On the Manner of Gauls. Talat Shaheen, the Egyptian writer and translator, translated selection of Costello's political essays published in Arabic under the papers of the Holy Violence, which included Landscapes of War from Sarajevo to Chechnya, Algeria in the Blow of Wind, Gaza, Jericho, Neither War Nor Peace. Finally, the Moroccan critic Ibrahim al-Khatib translated three of his novels, The Garden of Secrets, The Quarantine, and The Siege. Costello was a close personal friend of the poet Mahmoud Dرويش. They met frequently in Paris, Andalusia, Ramallah, Sarajevo, and other places. They appeared together on the French tape of the celebrity Jean-Loup Godard, Our Music. Costello says of Dرويش, he is one of the best Arab poets in the current century. His personal history reflects the history of his people. He was able to develop a beautiful, effective poetical concern and aesthetics, where Palestine stands in the heart of his poetry. Mahmoud Dرويش, as great poets usually are, was able, through constant inventions of language, to transcend reality imprinted in the reader's mind beyond the subject matter and the context of its poetic inspiration. For all of this, Juan Costello deserves Mahmoud Dرويش Award for 2011. Thank you.
طبعا هناك ترجمة لهذه الكلمة التي ألقاها مشكورا الدكتور أحمد حرب. ندعو المكرم الحاصل على الجائزة وأمين سر اللجنة التنفيذية لمنظمة التحرير رئيس مؤسسة محمود درويش والدكتور سلام فياض دولة الرئيس لتسليم الجائزة للأديب إخوان غوستيلو.
قبل ما تلقي الكلمة سلم الجائزة.
You receive the...
سادتي سيدتي أصدقاء كلهم، من قبل كل أريد أذكركم شي كلمات بالدارجة لأن أتكلم في المغرب. أصدقائي كلهم أرفوا لا أبحث جائزات والتي رفضت ليتدني المؤسسة قذافي من ليبيا، لأنني لا أريد المال قدير من ديكتاتوريين وطاغيات. ولكن إنزايل مكرم جدا بهذه الجائزة الفلسطينية بالاسم محمود درويش. محمود درويش كان واحد شاعر الكبير وصديقي العزيز. تعرفنا في باريس هذه 26 عام. جانا بعد في إسبانيا في الوقت جماعة على الموضوع الفكرين والكفاح الديمقراطية في الدولات العربية. وأخيرا سلام تاريخ في رمالة مع البرلمان الدولي الكتاب. الحاصل كان شاعر الكبير والرمز المقاومة الفلسطينية ضد الاحتلال والأبارتايد الإسرائيلي. شكرا جزيلا. As I wrote in the prologue to the Spanish edition of From Palestine, published 15 years ago, a foreign reader wishing to become familiar with the poetry of Mahmoud Dرويش must first consider a number of issues. Dروish's dual status as a Palestinian an Arabic poet, positions him in rocky terrain that initially seems resistant to the cultivation of aesthetic expression. Can one live and practice the subtle, aleatory art of poetry when one finds oneself by dint of a combination of circumstances at the epicenter of the typhoon? Does the wild wind of history that has ravaged successive Arab states in the Middle East from the Second World War onwards and swept an entire country from the map, transforming its offspring into refugees and pariahs in the space of their own land, allow Palestinian writers and poets to tackle themes apart from obsessive evocation of the diaspora, the humiliation of their fellow countrymen, or the defense of a case which they fight for against all hope of immediate victory? The temptation to reduce poetry to a weapon to combat oppression and injustice haunted Mahmoud Darwish throughout his life, but he never yielded to it or at all diminished the level of his art. The poet was also forced to contend with a tradition of careful rhetoric that the most significant voices of the Nakhda had already opposed. He had to free himself from the burden of an inheritance deadened by the worship of his own greatness, a visceral expression of a patriotism that rightly felt attacked, and an ideology imbued with Western progressive values. It was a challenge he met successfully. He went on to develop a genuinely individual poetic expression, the emotional content of which endures beyond the vicissitudes of history that sparked it, as the poet writes in one of his most significant works, Memory for Forgetfulness, in the description of the horrors of the Israeli army siege of Beirut and the isolation of the besieged. I quote, "Arab literary cycles have grown accustomed to re-engaging in the polemic over poetry whenever a new war breaks out. It seems intrinsic to our cultural tradition. We inexcusably combine bellicose ardor and poetic inspiration. A poet is thought to be a newsreader, an inciter of holy wars, and a war reporter. The same question in each battle. Where is the poem when we need it? Poetry of a political nature has melded into the particular event outside the unraveling of history." Conscious that poetry transcends journalistic reportage, he adds, "How could a new Arab literature that so needs a little tranquility be forged in the most heated moment of the battle? And how could our traditional poetry, even if all poetry is traditional in this day and age, portray his new song that is fermenting in the entrails of the earthquake? Be patient, intellectuals." Before the Nakhda, Arab poets had been paralyzed for centuries by their worship or fixed literary forms, prisoners of a formal framework that transformed the writing, as Salah Estetier wrote in an essay on the subject, into a series of refined linguistic rituals, a kind of gloriously ornate tour de force. The sudden eruption of history in the shape of intervention by the European colonial powers from the early 19th century to the end of the First World War